Not by might, not by power, by your spirit, God. Send your spirit, God. Not by might, not by power, by your spirit, God. Send your spirit, God. Not by might, not by power, by your spirit, God. Send your spirit, God. Not by might, not by power, by your spirit, God. Send your spirit, God. Breathe, breathe on us. Spirit, breathe. Come and breathe on us. Breathe, breathe on us. Spirit, breathe. Come and breathe on us. Not by might, not by power, by your spirit, God. Send your spirit, God. Good morning, good morning, good morning. I hope that everybody is having a wonderful day. That was the song that was on my mind this morning, and I see it was on a lot of you all's minds. Lady Barbara said she heard that song, and Lady Ravonda said that's her song. I want to say good morning to each and every one of you, and welcome to Daring Dialogues. I am your host, Shante Charles. I hope that again everybody has been having a great and wonderful day. We know that we are living in trying times, so we don't negate that. But what we do know is that we serve a living God, a good God in trying times. Yes, yes, we do. And so, even as I believe it is Dickens who said, it was the best of times and it was the worst of times, that two things could be going on simultaneously. And we see that happening right now in our nation. So, today is, if you have been with us any number of weeks, you know that on Wednesdays we discuss relationships. We try to cover human relationships in general, and also we have been talking about dating, the invention of dating, and hopefully this is where we're going to start today, the invention of dating. And we're going to share some things with you because for those of you who have been with us, again, for any length of time, we are over halfway through this book. I encourage you to get this book if you are single because it talks about the history and the evolution of dating. Especially for those of you who don't yet know and understand the difference between dating and courting and why they are not the same, why they are not alike, why they are not synonymous, and probably why, if you're a believer in Christ, you probably shouldn't be dating. All right. And I know there's lots of debate on it. I know that there is uh, many different thoughts about it. But I'm going to give you just some basic thoughts before we go into the book. Some of the things that we've already talked about concerning dating in general and this book. A friend of mine, Lady Apostle Sonia Green, I believe she came on yesterday and she had a brief Facebook Live and she was asking people about dating and courting and were they the same? And not surprisingly, many people said that they were the same. And I did invite them to come over this morning to the broadcast because again, I believe knowledge is power, and sometimes we can get involved in something and jump into it just because it's a part of our culture and we see other people doing it, but we don't really understand the foundation of a thing and the root of a thing and where it came from. So with the labor of love, okay, we have been talking about how did dating come to be? How did dating even evolve? And that's kind of where we are now. So, dating really started out as an option for single women who were away from home. And because of the way that our society and economy was set up, women were seen as pretty much working from home or pretty much not working at all. They were the primary caregivers of children. And so when our society began to shift economically and women began to work outside of the home, they were still not being paid an equal wage in comparison to a man. We know that that's still the issue today, but it was much more of a wage gap back then because a woman was expected to marry, to have children, and to be the caretaker at home. Well, again, as society changed, women began to work outside of the home. However, they were not being paid as much as men were, so they really couldn't hold and have an independent lifestyle without relying on the male population. And this is where dating came in because dating became this thing that women could do in order to supplement their lack of income. All right, that's where it originated from. So women would go out on dates with men, or they would be treated by men because they weren't making enough income to support themselves, and so they took dates from men so that they could have an extra meal for the week or have things paid for that they could not afford. And so, really, what dating actually came out of was a lesser form of prostitution. And we talked about this in Labor of Love already, that police were actually going out and arresting women who were participating in dating because it was seen as a transaction just without money. So then they had to come up with another class for dating to say, okay, this will be okay for our society. We won't count it as prostitution because no physical money is involved. So I need people to understand that the core root of dating came out of lack of economics, and it was labeled in the same category initially as prostitution. So when someone asks me, what is the difference between dating and, and courting, that's a very clear difference. Courting is not about prostituting yourself. Courting is supposed to have an intent, with a mind with an intent to marry the person. It isn't just you trying to see how many treats or how many dates you can go on or how many men you can exploit for their pockets. All right. Courting is supposed to be about a relationship that has an intent, that has an end goal of marriage. So that's one of the biggest differences between dating and courting. All right. So I just wanted to put that out there. Again, it is all in this book here, Labor of Love. Again, if you are a single person and you are considering dating, you want to understand dating, you have questions about it, I encourage you to get this book. It is not written from a believer's perspective, which in this case is actually good because she does not sugarcoat the origins of dating. And some of us just need to know the truth. We need to know the truth about what you may be and have been involved in. All right. Also, we're back in 11 today, and we're going to be continuing the talk about Deborah and who's your Deborah. You need someone who has your back. So I hope you have something to drink, and let us get into the labor of love. Right now, we're talking about how dating has evolved into using the niche market, which is targeting specific kinds of people, rounding them up, and then trying to connect them together. And that happens to be under online dating, which is what we're talking about now, and dating apps. I don't know if you all have seen some of the articles that have come out recently. It seems like we're always ahead of the curve talking about something, and then something will hit the news in regards to it. But there's been a couple of cases where women have been murdered, or their teenagers have been assaulted as a result of them connecting with someone through online dating or a dating app. And I think they just finally caught, I think they caught some kind of serial rapist or serial assaulter who was using one of the dating apps to collect his assault victims. So again, we want to remind you to be careful when you are using these kinds of methods in order to date. All right. So we are now talking about how this created a niche market. So for example, like we said last week, if you are a person who lives in the country and you're only interested in people who like farms and who like horses, and who is interested in doing life with you on a farm, they have dating apps that are geared specifically toward people who are farmers, people who live in rural areas, right? Then they have apps that are specifically geared toward people who, for example, only want to date a certain ethnos. So they have dating apps for people who only want to date Asians. They have dating apps for people who only want to date African Americans. There's all kinds of niche markets that have been created because of technology and this whole dating app online move towards dating. All right. So we're moving into another term here, the term yuppie. It is not clear who coined the term yuppie, but credit usually goes to Bob Greene. The Chicago Tribune columnist used it in an article about Jerry Rubin Business Networking Salon in March 1983. Rubin, the radical who had led the Youth International Party with Abbie Hoffman and stood with the Chicago Eight, was now hosting weekly networking sessions at the legendary Studio 54 Disco in New York. When you're ambitious in the business world, your day does not end at 5 o'clock, Rubin told Greene. His parties were invitation only. Guests had to pay $8 and deposit their business cards at the door, to be sorted later and ranked on a scale of networking value that ranged from A to D. The light stayed on and the soundtrack was soft classical music. This is not a singles bar, Rubin emphasized. It's a way for business people to meet other business people. It's an extension of your business day. In March 1983, he had plans to franchise in 36 cities. Someone at the party that Greene attended quipped that Rubin had gone from being leader of the Yippies to spokesman for the Yuppies, young urban professionals. That's what Yuppies stand for, young urban professionals. In the process, he had also converted one of America's most famously debauched places to go out into a place to network. Rubin was not the only one who recognized that Yuppies presented an enormous opportunity. In the early 1980s, political pollsters and market research firms became fixated on the emerging demographic. A study conducted by the California think tank SRI International in 1984 found that there were 4 million Americans between the ages of 25 and 39 who earned at least $40,000 per year in professional or management positions. Between 1979 and 1983, 1.2 million of them had moved to the cities that their parents had fled for the suburbs. They bought up Victorian brownstones in co-ops, in factories and warehouses, which had fallen into dereliction as America deindustrialized and developers were now racing to renovate them. 1 million plus was not enough to command serious attention from national politicians. But when pollsters lumped together all the baby boomers with college degrees who were working in white collar or technical professions, the number came to more than 20 million. As the companies aimed to capture this growing income of this market segment, the media obsessed about them, producing taxonomy after taxonomy of their peculiar traits. The main mythology that grew up around yuppies concerned not how much they bought, but actually what they bought. Armed with credit cards, They spent high sums on things that would have seemed absurd even 5 years earlier. They bought things like gourmet mustard, espresso machines, gym memberships. They did not want it all. They wanted very specific things. Good morning, Lady Apostle. To train their triceps, not their deltoids, not a Labrador, but an Akita. When the best selling satire, The Yuppie Handbook, came out in January 1984, it established that the foremost trait of a yuppie, a young urban professional, was an obsession with particular products. The cover depicts a white couple standing side by side with each item they are wearing and holding clearly labeled as in a high school physiology diagram. He has a pinstripe suit in the pocket of which there's a cross pin, a Rolex watch, and LL Bean Maine hunting duck boots. He is carrying a Gucci briefcase and a Burberry trench coat is slung over his forearm. She is sporting Ralph Lauren suit, a Cartier tank watch, and white running shoes. With a Coach bag on one arm and a bag of gourmet fresh pasta on the other, she is listening to her Sony Walkman. Name checking became a common feature of serious writing about yuppies too. In one scene of Don DeLeo's 1985 breakout novel, White Noise, the narrator overhears his young daughter murmuring the names of car models in her sleep. She uttered two clearly audible words, familiar and elusive at the same time, words that seem to have a ritual meaning, part of a verbal spell or ecstatic chant. Toyota Celica. So, here comes a generation, again, that becomes what they see as the niche generation, NICHE. These are people who come from a certain idea and mindset and demographic, and they're looking for specific things. So, this particular generation that they're talking about, the baby boomers, became what they call the niche generation. The generation that didn't want to just buy everything, but they wanted to buy specific things. I call them the name brand generation, right? Everything had to have some sort of name brand in order for you to be seen as popular or seen as moving up in the world. Jerry Rubin not only inspired a label for a generation obsessed with labeling, his business networking salon also captured an important shift in how young professionals were approaching their careers. This was the rise of the idea that everyone should work and should love working nonstop. If shop girls of the 1920s had tried to flirt and even date on the job, yuppies continued to hustle well after the office closed. The complicated financial instruments and maneuvers that Wall Street bankers and their lawyers cooked up inspired many a pun. Corporate marriage was one of those terms. It could refer either to a corporate merger of businesses, the consolidation of companies that was generating so much of the new wealth on Wall Street, or to a romantic partnership in which both lovers were lawyers or bankers, too busy to have much sex and therefore tolerant of affairs conducted on business trips. Consider the possibilities for double entendre afforded by horizontal mergers, profit squeezes, position limits, extension swaps, rollovers, interlocking directorates, and tender offers, and you get a rough idea of what passed for flirtation at an MBA cocktail hour. The famous speech that Steve Jobs gave at Stanford's commencement in 2005 was tame by comparison. However, Jobs too exhorted college graduates to mix business and pleasure. He insisted that the best thing that ever happened to him was being fired from his own company in 1985 because it taught him how important passion was for personal success. He said, I'm convinced that the only thing that kept me going was that I loved what I did. What he said next was widely reprinted and reblogged. You've got to find what you love, and that is as true for your work as it is for your lovers. The only way to do great work is to love what you do. If you haven't found it yet, keep looking. Don't settle. As with all matters of the heart, you'll know when you find it. Do what you love what you do. By the 1990s, the versions of this exhortation had become ubiquitous. Still, they could not quite cover up the fact that the career prospects of many Americans were actually getting worse. In the year of the yuppie, the Research Institute of America found that overall, young Americans were experiencing downward mobility. Between 1979 and 1983, the median annual income for households in the 25 to 34 age range had decreased by 14% in constant dollars. For the relatively unskilled, $12 an hour union jobs manufacturing cars were disappearing, and they were being replaced by $5 an hour gigs flipping burgers. And as we can see, that trend is continuing downward, with wages not really increasing, but the cost of living continuing to rise, which is why many people are advocating for a $15 minimum wage. With the stakes of staying upper middle class so high, the yuppie who would consider dating anyone other than another yuppie would be out of their mind. And indeed, in the 1980s, for the first time since the dawn of dating, America experienced a trend toward what's called assortative mating. In biology, assortative mating is a non-random mating pattern in which individuals with similar genotypes or phenotypes mate with one another more frequently than would be expected under a random mating pattern. Textbook example: animals with similar body sizes tend to reproduce with each other. Although it might theoretically be possible, one rarely sees a Yorkshire Terrier attempt to mount a Great Dane, or God forbid, vice versa. Before the rise of dating, courtship rituals like calling and church socials or Jewish settlement dances encouraged and even enforced similar mating patterns among humans. Parents and communities collaborated to ensure that young people paired off with partners who came from similar backgrounds. Dating did not entirely break down these biases and barriers. The middle and upper class men who frequented saloons and speakeasies did not all marry the charity girls they treated, because they were really just a treat. Institutions like schools sorted young people by educational attainment, which strongly correlated with family background and future earnings. Still, the migration of courtship from the privacy of the household or the closed ranks of community centers into public places where daters roamed, unsupervised, introduced an element of unpredictability. People who went out and hit it off with a stranger might actually fall in love. Moreover, workplaces offered opportunities for people from different classes and backgrounds to mix. At least until the early 1960s, a young woman in a professional workplace usually came from a lower socioeconomic bracket than the men she worked for. Until the 1980s, it was far from unheard of for a manager to marry a shop girl, a boss to marry his secretary, or a doctor to marry a nurse. However, as women gained opportunities to enter corporations as associates and partners, as well as secretaries and stenographers, the office dating pool grew. It made sense that young men and women who came from similar backgrounds, had attended the same colleges and graduate schools, and spent 12-hour plus days working closely together would hit it off. It is difficult to find reliable government data on how much and what kinds of people date in any given period. But it is clear that in the final decades of the 20th century, the highly educated women climbing the corporate ladder started marrying the men who were their professional peers. A 2014 study by the National Bureau of Economic Research showed that whereas in 1960 only 25% of men with university degrees married women also with university degrees, by 2005, 48% of them did. Moreover, when most highly paid women loved what they did, or at least they faced huge opportunity costs for any time they spent off the job. If and when they had children, most promptly returned to work, amplifying the growing economic inequality among American households. Assortative mating patterns reinforced themselves. So, yuppies wanted to date other yuppies. The thing was, who had time? They may have been the first elite in human history to boast, as a mark of their status, that they could not afford a moment of leisure. The leisure goods that yuppies did consume, they described as necessary to their work, as conveniences that made nonstop work possible, like eating out, or as part of a lifelong effort to work on themselves, like diets. Marketers soon discovered that you could literally sell yuppies, young urban professionals, anything if you promised that it would make them better. In New York in 1982, a line of fitness studios called Definitions opened, offering $600 a month gym memberships, excuse me, to young professionals who already belonged to a gym but wanted more targeted personal training. Today, you can still buy sessions with a personal trainer in packages of 25 for $2,800 at any one of the dozen locations. A sense of anxiety and precariousness lay not far below the well toned surface of the yuppie, urging him or her to improve harder, better, and faster. In 1984, Kellogg ran an ad campaign with the tagline, "It's not, are grape nuts good enough for you, but are you good enough for grape nuts?" If you're not the predator, you're the prey. Billboards for Puma sneakers warned. No wonder people were stressed. How could you know who was good enough to date? And where could you take them out to prove that you might actually be worthy of them? Remember, this is the labeling generation. So if it doesn't have a label as being good or excellent or superior or the end thing, then they don't want it. Okay? Yuppie daters were very particular about the restaurants they went to. Local newspapers of the 1980s are full of reviews of hot spots coming in and going out of fashion faster than the writers can keep up with. The Washington Post food editor Phyllis Richmond told Newsweek in 1984 that whenever she went somewhere, quote, "I inevitably find the same crowd of people who have discovered it already." She said that she could also sense when the yuppies would ditch a place or taste basically as soon as the plebs caught on. "When I saw white chocolate mousse being served in a hot shop," she recalled, "I knew." Luckily for daters who got restless so quickly, yuppies themselves came in many flavors. The press and posters talked about yappies, the young aspiring professionals, and yumpies, the young upwardly mobile professionals. The Yuppie Handbook included a 3-page spread listing the traits of buppies, who came out of yuppies, which became the black urban professionals, and huppies, Hispanic urban professionals, guppies, gay urban professionals, juppies, Japanese urban professionals, and puppies, pregnant urban professionals. So as you can see, they just continue to take that theme and just run it along ethnos and minority terms. Each subspecies had its own defining characteristics, but all were presented as customizations you might choose on a single yuppie model. Bullet points under buppies included great familiarity with reggae music, preference for custom made business suits, tendency to name their daughters Keisha instead of Rebecca. If female, the inclination to wear a second pair of pierced earrings with their diamond studs. Guppies, by contrast, were distinguished by summer holidays on Fire Island instead of in the Hamptons, and use of free weights instead of Nautilus equipment. These rhyming labels caught on with the newspapers and magazines that carried stories about dating. The pun yuppie love became inescapable. Buppy and Guppy made good showings too. The oral proximity of these jingling acronyms forced deeply held beliefs of the Reagan era. Politics were passe, everyone started out the same. If this was equality of opportunity, not outcomes that mattered. By this logic, a yuppie might choose his mate as freely as he chose a blue or tan silver paint job for his sob. Indeed, satirists describe yuppies as treating their love lives like any other consumer or career choice, only, if anything, a little less important. So, when we come back next week, we're going to continue this talk about the yuppies. Yuppies would probably be some of our parents. Some of you on here might be considered the yuppie generation, the generation that was all about labels and designer clothing, designer cars, designer gym memberships. All of that falls under yuppies. All right. So, in our general relationships today, for those of you who are new, we are reading from the book 11 by Leonard Sweet. And the question is, who's your Deborah? You need a back coverer. You need a back coverer. The writer goes on to say today, I will never forget a Starbucks meeting with a pastor and his lead elder. They wanted some advice on how to take their staff to the next level. As we stood up to go, I felt moved to say to the pastor, remember one more thing. You can count on one of your confidants betraying you. Every time you see a picture of Leonardo da Vinci's The Last Supper, don't look for the hidden Mary inside of the picture. Look for the hidden Judas. Goethe, in a famous essay, suggested the whole picture was designed to convey Christ's words, one of you shall betray me. The lead elder laughed and said to the pastor, you don't think it's me, do you? The pastor laughed back, just don't do it with a kiss. A year later, it came out that the pastor's wife and that lead elder were having an affair. Selah. From a distance. Sometimes Deborahs fight alongside you on the front lines, but mostly they cover you with prayer from a distance. Raise your hand or put some hearts on the screen if you have some people in your life that you know that cover you from a distance in prayer. In the opening battle scene of the movie Gladiator, the film that came out in 2000, General Maximus Russell Crowe shouts to his men, unleash hell against the Visigoths. With great balls of fire crashing all around them, General Maximus feels the armor of someone brush against his back. He whips around expecting to find an enemy to fight, but discovers his armor bearer protecting his rear. If you're a right-handed quarterback, one of your most trusted allies is the left tackle on the offensive line. This is your blind side. Remember, there was an entire movie centered around the blind side. And the best defensive linemen are put here to intimidate you and make reads and progressions. The success of every right-handed quarterback is a left tackle named Deborah who has his back. It is not always true, however, that those closest to you determine your level of success. Let me say that again. It is not always true, however, that those closest to you determine your level of success. Deborah didn't fight next to Barak. She covered Barak's back with the fire of her words, her spirit, and her courage. She was always close enough to catch Barak's eye. Some people have a Holy Spirit, and the presence of that Holy Spirit in your life is enough to be your Deborah. For those of you coming in, we're talking about who's your Deborah, who is a person in your life that has your back. Sometimes we need a Deborah to protect us against ourselves. Raise your hand or put some hearts on the screen if you have friends in your life who have protected you against yourself. Thank God I had friends especially when I was engaged, that protected me against myself. What self wanted to go out and do. hmm The kind of trouble that self wanted to get into. I had friends that said, no, you're not going to do that. Matter of fact, we're going to stay over here with you to make sure you don't do that. We're not driving you over to Mr. Charles's house after a certain time because we know what happens after a certain time with people who love each other. So, no, we're not going to aid and abet you in your campaign that could possibly cause a downfall in your relationship. You need people around you like that who will say, no, we're not going to help you fall. We're not going to help you put yourself in a position that is not going to have a positive outcome for you. I have friends like that. Do you? Do you have friends like that? Especially if you're single. If you're single and all of your single friends want to do the exact same things you want to do all the time, that's not good. Because that means there's no one amongst you that can check your behaviors. And that can check what you want to do and where you want to go and what you want to be involved in. You need friends who need to say, hey, guys, this is not a good idea. You need people amongst you, all right, in your sphere of influence who are going to check your behavior and actions, because that's what friends do. They don't just go along to get along. They actually question you. They actually challenge you. They actually say, is this a good idea? Should we be doing this right now? Should we go to this place? Let's consider what's going to happen. All right? Yes, you also need editors for your life. So sometimes we need a Deborah to protect us against ourselves. We are most vulnerable to shooting ourselves in the foot when we are riding the crest of the wave and when the puffery of the occasion makes us susceptible to puffs of evil. Very early in my ministry, a friend running for bishop started to believe all the nice things that people were saying about him. Listen, please know yourself and don't believe all of the good press. Don't believe all of the bad press, but don't believe all of the good press either. I kept telling him, don't breathe in, don't breathe in. But he kept breathing deeper and deeper until after the months of running, I did not recognize him and he didn't recognize me. He never became bishop, but he never recovered from what I now call altitude sickness. Maybe that's the origin of the saying that a friend made bishop is a friend lost. Wow. Timeless little Debbies. The final 2 points go together under this heading because, well, they go together. You can Deborah people you don't know. What does he mean by that? I am the kind of person who doesn't like to be told what to do. So I'm prone to do just the opposite when I'm commanded to do something, the writer states. Take the sign, please flush. My first reaction to the person who put the sign there is, flush yourself. But when I think about the sign relationally and begin to think about the person coming after me, suddenly I became very willing to please flush. There are little Debbies we can do to cover the backs of people we don't know. Scripture refers to little Debbies as looking out for the least of these. You just might have someone come up to you in heaven one day and say, hey, you don't know me, but thanks for flushing. Really. Deborah can we can Deborah generations that come after us and before us. That is what I believe that I'm doing even now. You can cover the back of people who aren't even here yet. You can speak to the future generations before they get here. You can leave them words of encouragement. You can write books that speak to the next generation before they even get here. When a politician and a painter are friends, anything can happen. Former French Prime Minister Georges Clemenceau and Claude Monet, founder of French Impressionism, were friends. They each lived to be old men and each died within a few years of one another, Monet first. A Deborah has a keen radar for any sense of disrespect or danger. When Clemenceau saw a black shroud draping Monet's coffin, a sudden burst of fury overtook him. Rushing to a nearby window, he ripped a colorful curtain from its rod and cast the black shroud to the ground and covered the coffin with the drape. For his friend to be buried in a color he had banned from his palette was the ultimate insult. Even in death, Monet's back was being covered from the affront of the black cloud. A chivalrous conclusion. Centuries ago, it was the function of knights to be back coverers for the weak and wounded. The role of medieval knights, especially in an age of chivalry, was to be protectors of the weak and unarmed, the priest, the peasant, the poor, and the child in a violent world. Like law enforcement officers and military personnel today, knights often put their lives in jeopardy for the sake of others, even strangers, and an ethic of knighthood found classic expression in the Knights of the Round Table. In the ethic of the Round Table, personal glory came from royal service and selfless sacrifice. Today we call knights Deborahs, cardinal members of your round table of witnesses. So the question is, who are your protectors now? Who have been your protectors? How important is it that you name your Deborah? And what can you do to reinforce his or her identity as a back coverer in your life? When is the last time you thanked someone for covering your back? I'll tell you, one of the Deborahs that many people overlook is what people on social media like to call the grammar police. Yep. I'm a part of the grammar police, except I don't like to call myself a grammar police, but some of my friends call me the grammar police. But here's the thing. Would you rather your friends look at your posts, see all of your errors, and some things are kind of funny errors, but would you rather them to look at it and just leave it out there and not tell you, and everybody else come along and read your post and laugh at all of your mistakes? Or would you rather somebody come and say, I think you might want to change this word? Or inbox you and say, hey, you might want to go reread what you wrote because there's some words in there that I don't think you meant to write. What kind of person do you want to have covering your back? To me, it's like leaving the restroom and having toilet paper stuck under the bottom of your shoe. And you walking around everywhere, just having a wonderful day, and everyone you pass by is either giggling or smirking, and you're wondering, what is everybody laughing at? Until you get to your car and you're putting your feet inside your car and you realize you've been dragging a piece of toilet paper underneath your shoe the entire time. I don't know about you, but I want a friend that can say, hey, you got something stuck under the bottom of your shoe. You might want to remove it because it doesn't belong there. It's not a part of your outfit. It's not a part of you. So we definitely want to make sure that we are not turning our Deborahs away. All right. We're moving on to our next person. Remember, on Monday, we're going to be covering Zacchaeus. Who's your Zacchaeus? But today, we're covering Who's Your Rhoda? Who's your Rhoda? This is our new person. You need a little one. You need a little one. Children are just people in process of getting older. I actually believe that. I believe children are little people and little human beings. And when we treat them like little people, they'll grow up to be great adults. When we treat them like our property, they'll grow up to be property that does damage and resents you as an adult. All right? That's what I believe. Children are just people in process of getting older, vulnerable people learning to be human, and wise children know that being men and women is much more interesting and complicated than the state in which they are temporarily stuck as children. A.S. Byatt, B-Y-A-T-T. When it came time for Jesus to get real and showcase his ideal model of faith, he didn't tap on the shoulder of a scholar or parade an athlete before the onlookers, and he certainly didn't point out a king. He chose a baby face as faith's gold standard. That's why you need a Rhoda. Rhoda who? The first voice heard from a Christian woman in the church of the book of Acts. That's who. And that woman was a child. God's little rosebud. Rhoda was a doorkeeper in the house of Mary in Jerusalem, even though she was a servant girl. Rhoda, short for Rosebud, participated in family prayer, no doubt because she not only believed in prayer, but also expected and watched for God to answer her prayers. During one late night prayer meeting, the adults were praying hard for an imprisoned Peter. James, one of Jesus' disciples, had already been executed, and everyone feared that Peter was next on Herod's list. In the midst of all this praying, there was a knock at the gate. Rhoda went to answer it, and in her excitement from hearing Peter's voice, hastened back to the meeting without opening the door, as sometimes young people do. She forgot to open the door for Peter. Delirious with joy, she could barely voice the good news. Their prayers had been answered. Peter was standing outside, wanting to be let in. They began to laugh and mock crazy Rhoda, but she persisted. Then they dismissed her insistence with, well, it must be his angel. A determined Rhoda finally convinced the adults to break away from their prayer exercises and see their prayers take flight. The adults were almost as much in jail as Peter, so busy being prayer warriors and enjoying the holy haze of prayer meetings that their gaze never lifted and their prayer life never got off the ground. It took a child to point out to them the reality of answered prayer. Just as Rhoda said, there stood Peter at the gate, waiting to be let in. Sometimes it takes a child to point out the obvious, and a child shall lead them. Now, whew, the author just packed a lot of revelation in there. I hope you all heard it. He just packed a lot of revelation into one paragraph. Who is our crazy Rhodas today? To me, our crazy Rhodas are Generation Z. Not the millennials. It's not the millennials. Our crazy Rhodas are Generation Z. Who is Generation Z? Generation Z is 18 and under. Generation Z are the people that are yet to be born, who are still in the womb right now. I know I have several friends and a family member who is now expecting. They're expecting Generation Z who's still in the womb. But if you notice, Generation Z is considered to me like the crazy Rhoda because they are the ones that want to carry the good news. They are the ones who stand watching and praying for results. They are the ones who it seems like they're trying to convince the current generations, the older generations, to see what is happening and to realize and to recognize that there's a manifestation of things coming. And what are our older generations doing? Our older generations are doing what has always worked, right? They're doing the prayer exercises. They're doing the prayer meetings. They are the ones busy being the prayer warriors. But you have Rhodas coming along and saying, what you've been praying for is here. We are the generation you've been praying for. We are the generation you've been seeking. We are the generation that will bring change. We are the generation that wants manifestation. The manifestation generation, Generation Z, Generation Zenith. All right? They are the ones who expect prayer to not just be a exercise that you do, but they are expecting prayer to be something that is manifest. They are expecting the reality of answered prayer. They don't just want you to pray about it, they want you to be about it. So, Generation Z is very much like Rhoda. So, I want you to keep that in mind. Wifeless, childless, children first, Jesus. Listen to that again. Wifeless, childless, children first, Jesus. Jesus' startling affirmations of children first make strange with our expectations. Jesus lived without children of his own, but when he wants to show what discipleship is like, he plops a child in front of his disciples. Why a child? Because a child is innocent until they are corrupted by evil adults. Because a child is pure. Because a child is more truthful and trusting. History, theology, and personal experience prevent any sweet, innocent, cheek-pinching sentimentalization of childhood. Childhood is largely a Victorian invention. Before 1800, the protected stage of childhood is missing from history. A crack in time can be seen in the Iranian version of Islamic law, in which girls today can be given in marriage at the age of 9. Up until the Enlightenment, large numbers of children toiled in the worst possible places, such as mines and fields and sweatshops, and public hangings of children were common. As far as theology is concerned, Reinhold Niebuhr ventured that the greatest proof of original sin was a newborn. I admit it. No one can wrench out the Grinch in me faster than a sweet, innocent, untouchable miniature Attila the Hun who seems to fill up planes these days. So why a child? Because it was a child, and children were of no account even in Jesus' day, enjoying a little lower status than women. Some rabbis said better to burn a Torah than to give it to a woman. A little higher status than beasts. Little ones, especially women, little ones, were considered worthless, insignificant, despised, degraded, and neglected. But in the gospel, according to Jesus, little ones to him belong. They are weak, but he is strong. The Jesus gospel showed how little is large, and Jesus' whole ministry was a sign system in how to be retrievers of the neglected, the maligned, the misfits, and the little, and how to trust the God of history to act in history in the spirit of the Magnificat, who fills the hungry with good things and empties the pockets of the rich. Children first was the Jesus motto because in the kingdom of God, the last are first. Don't leave the child behind. Yes, put away childish ways. You enter adulthood when you stop eating multicolored breakfast cereal, but not children. For children keep you in childhood all your adult life. Childish and childlike are vastly different. A childish faith needs to have an answer and needs it now. If not, I will take my ball and go somewhere else. A childlike faith trusts the one in charge, not understanding it all, but loving or honoring the one in charge. Do not be children in your thinking. Be babes in evil, but in thinking be mature. The Apostle Paul. Difficult stories, and we're going to stop here. After the Harry Potter series took off, I knew some parents who banned all the books from their homes. I didn't think twice about it until I was speaking to a convention of Christian school principals. In the course of my first speech about the gospel as the telling of different stories, I referenced J.K. Rowling. When I was finished speaking, a delegation of not so happy administrators met me at the edge of the platform. Dr. Sweet, don't you know that such stories lead children astray and glorify evil? But these are just stories, I protested. They are modern day versions of the Brothers Grimm, Aesop's Fables, Mother Goose, Hans Christian Andersen, and Lewis Carroll. There is no such thing as just stories. Harry Potter stories are not innocent, but insidious stories. They're full of magic and witchcraft and spells and all sorts of evil. And the Brothers Grimm aren't, I countered, realizing that this approach was not going to get me anywhere, so I tried another. Besides, our children know that these stories are made up, not true, real life stories, but they can't tell the difference. I didn't say it out loud, but my next line would have curdled in the air. Wait a minute. Who is it that can't tell the difference? The adults or the children? I failed to convince anyone of anything except me, and what I came away convinced of was this. Children can often be more grown up than adults, and I will never say just stories again. You can't get real, grow up, and act infantile at the same time. But you can't do authentic adulthood without childhood either. When Anglican Bishop Michael Ramsey died, church historian Owen Chadwick said this about him. Children thought he was the nearest thing to God. Michael Ramsey thought they were. There are those in this abbey who think both were right. So, who is your Rhoda? I want you to think about that as you continue going throughout this week. Who are the little ones in your life? Who are the people that have a genuine, sincere faith who will believe God? You need Rhodas in your life. You need the next generation in your life. I know some people have written off the next generations. A lot of people have written off millennials. But the reality is, they are the future. And so, if we know they are the future, it would behoove us to invest in them. Right? Millennials are right under me. I am a yennial. We are the generation who is between Generation X and the millennials. All right? If you are a mid 70s baby going into the 80s, you are actually considered a yennial. You are not a Generation Xer. You're not a millennial, but you can actually understand both generations. So that puts you in a very good place to relate. All right. This has been another episode of Daring Dialogues, and I've been your host today, Shantae Charles. If you would be so kind, if you came in late, you can rewind and catch the first half of our broadcast where we talked about labor of love, the invention of dating, and we covered the yuppies, the young urban professionals, and we talked about how they changed the dating scene based on their likes and their dislikes. I want to thank you again for your time and attention. Remember, light is the most daring opposition to darkness, so please go out today and be light. Take care, and we'll see you tomorrow for Theology Thursday. God bless.